Hey everybody, Travis Watkins here, tax attorney, and I want to thank you for watching these videos. We're trying to give you lots and lots of content about tax matters and trying to educate you on when you owe the IRS or the state, the types of things that you can expect, and the type of relief that is available to you to help you out with those types of things. So we're going a little deeper than we've gone on even in my book, The Ultimate Survival Guide for IRS Problems, which you can get at traviswatkinsbook.com. We're compiling all these things into an upcoming book that's going to have some real complicated title to it, I'm sure, something like Read This Book If You Want to Solve Your IRS Problem, something like that. Took me a long time to come up with that. Anyway, a lot of people have been asking and ask our office all the time about our state tax problems and state tax relief, because they often run hand in hand with IRS problems. In other words, when you owe the IRS, there's a good chance that you probably owe the state taxation authority as well. And this is a really big deal, especially for people that are licensed by state governments, those being, real estate agents, insurance agents, nurses, doctors, lawyers, anybody who has a license from the state. If they get behind on taxes, are putting that license in jeopardy. So this is something that is very common, and it's something that you need to know about if you have one of these types of problems. So let's talk a little bit about how IRS relief is different from state tax relief. And I've come up with 6 of these things. There's probably a bunch more, but 6 works pretty well. These are the 6 big differences that I could think of kind of off the top of my head. First of all, states have a lot longer to go after you than the IRS does. And this advice that I'm talking about here today is really more geared towards Oklahoma type taxes, Oklahoma state taxes. But it's been our experience in dealing with other state taxation authorities that these truths are consistent among the various states, and we can represent taxpayers in different states. You don't necessarily have to be a lawyer to do these types of representations. You could do it for grandma. You could certainly do it for yourself if you are brave enough and you feel like you've got the know-how to do it. But that little caveat here as we go into these things is worth mentioning. But the states typically have a lot longer to go after you than the IRS does. We've talked about the IRS having 10 full years to go after you for a past due tax bill, and that is 10 years from the assessment date. It's not just 10 straight years from when the tax should have been due. So you have to have a tax return on file for these statutes of limitations to start running against the taxation authority, and most states are no different in that regard. But they are different because they have much longer to come after you. In Oklahoma, for instance, the state taxation authority here, the Oklahoma Tax Commission, has 9 full years to file a tax lien against someone for a past due tax, and that can be renewed one time as well, and it's good for 10 years. So they've got 9 years to come after you to file a lien, and that's good for 10 years, and then they can renew that, and it's good for another 10 years, for a grand total of 29 years at the Oklahoma Tax Commission. can come after taxpayers. And we get it all the time. We get folks calling in saying, man, they're coming after me for something, for some sales tax or something that happened, 10 failed businesses ago back in the 90s. And it's this treacherously long statute of limitations that our state has, and many other states have longer than the IRS's 10 years to come after you. Number two, state tax authorities get more deference, or they get more leeway when they have to go to district court. Either they come after you in district court, or you file some type of a protest that carries this type of due process where you can go to district court. Even more than the IRS gets in the way of leeway and deference when it comes to their interpretation of tax laws, you can pretty much be guaranteed that the state is going to get the benefit of virtually every doubt, especially when it comes to administration of their very own tax code. So that's all to say that if you go to court with a state tax issue, there's big chance you're going to lose. So what that means is you're better off trying to work something out with a state tax authority before it gets to that court process. Okay? So number three, and before I move on to number three, I think it's worth saying, since they get so much deference, maybe they get a little more cocky than a regular litigant or even a regular creditor would. So they're so used to winning that you tend to get a little more aggressive and a little more sure of yourself. So I think that's a byproduct of them getting a lot of deference also. All right, moving on to number three. Typically when you have state tax problems, you will be at some point, if this is a tax problem of any magnitude or importance to the state, which they're all important to the state, I guess, then you will be facing an attorney at some point from a state taxation authority, more than likely. Okay? That's not necessarily the case, it's rarely the case, when you owe federal taxes. The revenue officers in the federal system are usually not attorneys. They are lay people that are highly trained at collecting taxes, but they're not attorneys. State taxation authorities, since everything ultimately, has to, of any magnitude, if they give you a settlement, for instance, which is a rare thing too, then it has to be blessed by the state. That's true in Oklahoma. And who's going to be representing them in that is going to be a state attorney. So they're blessing most of these things, even if you're not dealing with an attorney along the way. Although a lot of things in the state system, you will be dealing with attorneys, not only for the blessing stages of things, but along the way as well. All right, number four, the fourth biggest difference of IRS tax matters and state tax matters, there are fewer alternatives available when you have a state tax problem. And let me explain that. In the IRS forum, when you owe taxes and you're asking for relief, you have lots of things available at your disposal to ask the government to cut you a break. You have the offer and compromise program, which is a huge one, where you may save actual tax in that process. There are different types of installment agreements, some of which act exactly like the offer and compromise. It's based on how long the service can come after you, and if they can't collect it all within the time they have to collect it, then you'll make payments to the IRS only up until the statute of limitations runs against them. There are, in the federal system, penalty abatements. There's innocent spouse relief. Those types of things are all available at the IRS. The state may have a similar type of an alternative there, but nothing quite as comprehensive in most states as the offer in compromise, and certainly isn't going to stop collection in most cases at the state level, while they take sometimes their sweet time to evaluate a settlement request. Okay, so know that there is less relief available to you on state taxes. Number 5, settlements. Offers in compromise, as they call them in the federal scheme, are more difficult to get and more rare to get in most states than they are in the federal system. And going back to the Oklahoma system, the one that we deal with the most, the standard for getting a settlement, something like an offer in compromise with the state, is that you have to show them that you are insolvent. And there's a definition of insolvency, I think it is borrowed from the bankruptcy code, that essentially you are destitute. You on paper are completely uncollectible is really what they're looking at there, and that they're just not going to be able to collect this thing over the course of even the 29 years in the state of Oklahoma that they would have to collect this thing. Okay. All right. We've talked about 5 things that are not really that fun when dealing with state taxes versus IRS taxes, but there is one glimmering ray of hope here with the difference between state and IRS taxes. At least in the state of Oklahoma, they will forgive pure interest in some cases, in addition to penalties that you may owe. And in the federal system, they will never abate or forgive pure interest if you owe them on a tax liability. That's just doesn't happen. Now, if they forgive a penalty, which they do on occasion at the IRS level, then they'll also get rid of the interest that accrued on top of that penalty. All right, so that's fair. So the interest on penalty gets removed. But the state tax authorities have programs in most states that I've dealt with for also forgiving the interest part of the whole tax as well, under very similar types of standards that you find in the federal system. In other words, you've got to show them by tax year why a reasonable cause, in other words, why they should get rid of the penalty and also the interest in that scenario. I've also had state taxation authorities in that process ask me, well, what about the time value of money, which I thought was an interesting concept, one borrowed from the capitalistic business world. What they're talking about here is, why should they forgive interest? Because there was a time, there's a value to that money that you didn't have to pay, that they could have reinvested somewhere else. And I don't know, I find that kind of a foreign concept to a government financial system, but nonetheless, it was a fair question. So, all right, those are the things that you can expect, generally speaking, with a state tax liability, and how that may differ from what we've talked about in the IRS resolution and relief scheme. All right, I'm Travis Watkins, and as I mentioned, I'm an attorney in Oklahoma, although we can assist taxpayers in other states. I am licensed to talk to the IRS in all 50 states, and correspondingly, if you have a state tax problem in a state other than Oklahoma, then more than likely we can talk to those state taxing authorities on your behalf so you don't have to mess with them. If you'd like to talk right now with someone in my office about what that looks like, how we might be able to help you out, or if you have any questions at all about the state tax relief programs that are available, give us a call, 800-721-7054. Hope you have a great day and a great weekend. Thanks for watching.